What's up, everybody? My name is Joe Brown, and this is Heresy Financial. Very special episode for you today. I had Mark Moss on the channel as a guest, and we had a fantastic conversation talking about Bitcoin, gold, the cycles of history, and decentralization and centralization, where that might take us in the near future. Without further ado, let's dive in. I've got a lot of respect for you and what you've built and some of the things that we've already started talking about already, and bringing the information and education about what's really going on so that if you understand what's happening behind the scenes, you can better prepare for what's going forward. And I really respect what you built and the education that you bring into a lot of people on that.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah. So I was just curious then about some of the stuff that we've kind of already touched on a little bit about, as the world is really changing, and it's always been changing, right? But you can notice a couple things that are really starting to brew right now, and a lot of people are looking at Bitcoin. A lot of people are looking at gold. A lot of people are looking at different places to go in the world, just like, hey, I'm getting out of here. And you've kind of touched on how a lot of those things kind of go hand in hand. Where do you start with somebody who's, just let's say found you for the first time, or a friend or a family member that has, no idea? What's the first thing that really starts to get people's wheels spinning?
I would say you start with them. So if I was going to sell you a product, I work for a company and I have a widget that I want to sell you. What a lot of salespeople do, they make the wrong move and they go, and we would call it like spilling your candy in the lobby. My product can do this and this and this, and my company's this and this and this. And you're just like, okay. The real way to do sales is to ask you questions and find out what's your one need that you have, and then match my one benefit to your one need. And so when you touched on a couple of different topics there: gold, sound money, Bitcoin, travel, etc. But like, what's important to you right now? And let's start there. Because that's what you care about the most. That's what has the most impact. And then we can kind of scale out from there. And I mean, this narrative that's being pushed around, where we're all in this together, just could never be more false. Like, we're not in this together. We're all starting in different places. We all want to go different places. We all have different timeframes, different money, different education, et cetera. And so, we're not in this together. What's important to you? And then we start there.
Yeah. Well, that's a great point, because especially in the larger countries, the more developed countries, like in the West, there's an idea that hey, if we just get the right person in charge, or if we just get the right policies put in place, it'll be better for everybody. And human nature is more, it works better decentralized. I mean, that was the whole point of the United States, right? Bottom up. But that one solution for you is not necessarily the best solution for me, and we'll all work together better if we each have our own set of solutions.
Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. The United States was set up as a decentralized government, and really, so you have like two opposite ends of the spectrum. People, I think, get caught up in labels: socialism, fascism, communism, capitalism, whatever. At the end of the day, there's just two spectrums. And I think there's like individualism over here, and there's collectivism over here. And I believe, kind of to what you said, which is right, is like individualism is better, because as human beings, we're driven by our own self-interest, our own self-preservation. Right. And so what happens, though, is that, like, I'm driven by my self-preservation and you are as well. But sometimes those interests align. And when those align, that's when we work together. So, for example, if you and I were together and we're both selfishly looking out for our own self-interest, if somebody came to attack us, you and I would easily join together to fend off that attacker. So that'd be like an example. And so all throughout society, there's ways where you and I are cooperating on a video right now, right? And so we cooperate on different things, because this leads to my end and your end. The reason why I believe that there's a number of reasons why it's so important, though, is because if you understand how progress is made, one of my favorite economists, Hayek, wrote some amazing books, and I think his last work was called The Constitution of Liberty. And he spells out a whole chapter just on progress. And he talks about the more people you have ideating on different problems, the more progress you have. So you and I, we look at the world differently. We see different problems and we come up with different solutions. So we have more people solving problems. If you and I were the same, if we're all collectivists, we all think like robots, no one's solving any problems. We're not coming up with
Right.
anything creative, and there's no progress in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the problem of scale is ignored a lot in that kind of that spectrum, because you talk about cooperation and collectivism. That works really well as a family, right? My family, like, we cooperate really well together. It would not be, we wouldn't be a very cohesive unit if we were all doing our own thing. But when scale changes things so much that by the time you scale up to a large enough size, the dynamics can be completely reversed.
Yeah.
Like, it's better for me if I have more money, but it's not better for an economy if the whole economy has more money.
Talib said, and I'll probably butcher it, but he said, like, with my family, I'm a communist.
Yeah.
With my friends, I'm a socialist.
Yeah.
And it scales up. With my community, I'm a capitalist. With my government, I'm a libertarian, or whatever it is. Right. But it scales up that way because, to your point, with my family, I share everything with my family. We're communists. Right. We live in a commune, right? But that can't work in a country.
Yeah.
And so the further you get away from that small unit, the more freedom has to be given back to the person to decide.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And specifically when you're talking about economics, one of the dynamics that plays into that is like random luck, right? So if you've got everybody doing the same thing, you don't have that the opportunity for luck to play a role in producing or exposing the best solution that everybody, or what will create the most wealth or most progress. And if you have everybody doing, attacking things from different angles, you're going to have a lot of failure. But overall, the net wealth growth is going to be a lot more than what might be lost on the individual failures.
Yeah, I mean, you're just funneling everybody into that same kind of that collectivist role again. And so again, to the point I made earlier, right? You don't have enough people out there progressing or ideating or trying new things, new solutions.
Right. Right. So this is something I've been thinking about recently then, because given what's going on with, the coming, what it seems like the coming death of fiat currencies, really. And it seems like it's a when, not an if. When I'm looking at, like, Bitcoin seems more like the people's money. It's evolving and emerging from the ground up. Yep. Gold is looking more and more like, it's central banks are still hoarding and buying lots of gold. So it seems like as these kind of roads collide at the end, what's your opinion on what it will look like after? Do we think maybe there will be different forms of money and just the free market sets the value in between? Do you think most of the world will adopt, Bitcoin, or we'll have to be under coercion of gold central banks again? Like, what are you thinking on that?
I think there's a kind of a process. So I think obviously gold and Bitcoin are both kind of fighting the same battle in a sense to go back to a sound money. So first, I would break it down between like a fiat money system, which is where they can print unlimited amounts of money, and a sound money system. And the reason why, that's a whole other conversation of what money is, but money has to have scarcity, and it has to have a true cost of capital, because money represents energy. So I eat calories. Calories are burned as energy in my body. I can go expend energy digging a hole. 4 hours of digging a hole, expending energy, gives me enough supplies to live off of. If I work an extra 4 hours, I expend energy, then I need money that allows me to store my life's energy, right? If we look at it kind of like from that standpoint. And so money has to have a true cost of capital, because if somebody has a money printer and someone else is forced to work for money, the person with the money printer is going to steal their life, put them into slavery every time. So really, it's a battle between the money printer and then sound money, which is gold. So gold has a true cost of capital, meaning I have to spend money to get it out of the ground. So nobody can just go artificially create it like hitting a button. Bitcoin is very similar. I have to spend capital to get it out of the ground. So they're both stuck with being kind of sound money and having that true cost of capital. The problem between, so now that separates fiat from sound money. Back to F.A. Hayek, because he famously said back in the 80s that there will never be a sound money again until the thing is taken from the hands of the government. But it can't be done by force, but rather in a sly roundabout way, until it's so big they can't do anything about it. And so the problem with gold, everyone says, well, it's been money for 5,000 years. And they're absolutely true. It has. But candles also provided light for thousands of years. And then we had electricity. And people walked and rode horses for all of humanity. And then we had cars. So things change. And so, yes, gold was money for 5,000 years. And it's a very good form of money because it meets all the characteristics. But the problem is it doesn't make the digital age. Gold is so big and so heavy, it requires centralization. So paper gold certificates in the late 1800s was a new technology. It allowed us to easily, send and receive payments, but that required centralization. So all the gold went into the banks.
Right.
And because all the gold went into the banks, then in 1933, they made it illegal and they just seized all the gold. So they made it illegal for people to own gold, right? So gold always requires that centralization. You and we can't send gold over the internet. So it's always going to require centralization. And so it's good from that standpoint. Now, Bitcoin is very similar, a lot of the characteristics of gold, but it's a natively digital form of money. So it makes the leap with technology. That's, I guess, is probably the big thing. Now, the next part of the question was you asked which one kind of plays out and wins. Is that where you want to jump into next?
Sure. I mean, we can speculate, right?
Well, I don't know how much of a speculation it is. I feel pretty confident in it because I'm a student of history, and I believe, I say, if you don't know history, you're bound to repeat it. Well, history repeats. It changes. So people think that progress is linear, like, we move one step in front of the next, but really it's exponential. So we're exponentially progressing, but at the same time, we're repeating. And so if we look through history, we can see it's a series of freedom, oppression, right? Revolution, et cetera. And so really it moves on like a 250-year time frame. Every 250 years, we have like a revolution. So every 84 years, there's what we call populist uprising or regime change. So 84 years ago was Hitler, Mussolini, and FDR's New Deal. 84 years before that was Karl Marx, Communist Manifesto, the European Spring, largest revolution in European history. 3 times 84, 3 84-year cycles equals 252. 250-year cycle. 250 years ago was the American French Revolution. 250 years before that was the Protestant Reformation. And each one of those are rejecting centralization to move to decentralization.
Yeah.
So the American French Revolution, you mentioned earlier, the United States was set up as a decentralized government, was rejecting the centralized monarchy and set up a decentralized government. So right now, I think it's pretty evident to anybody that's paying attention that we're like really at peak globalization or centralization right now. So World Economic Forum, World Health Organization, World Trade Organization, the IMF, the UN, et cetera. And what we can also see is the whole world is pushing back on that at the same time. So yesterday in Brazil, there was millions of people protesting. Australia, France, Amsterdam. I mean, the whole world's basically erupting, all pushing back on that. So we're in this revolutionary cycle. So when we ask ourselves, like, what comes next in the financial system? Will the dollar survive? Will we go back to the gold standard? Like you said, I think you said, will the bankers force us to go back to the gold standard? Or will it be this, digital yuan? Was China going to launch their gold-backed central bank digital currency? They're all looking for a centralized answer, right? Those are all centralized answers. But history tells us that we move from centralization to decentralization. So I believe history tells us, and I believe what we're seeing right now, peak centralization being pushed back. And I believe the future is decentralized. So what does that mean? Well, solutions come to problems. So right now, the problems that we have are, I believe all the problems in the world could be traced back to the money printer.
Yeah.
If we had a giant oak tree and with 10,000 leaves and every leaf on the tree was a problem, the divorce rate, the incarceration rate, the inequality, the health, at the base of that tree is that money printer. So that's a problem, right? That's a big problem. We have censorship as a big problem, not just censored what you and I can say online, but even my money is censored. PayPal just joined with the Anti-Defamation League to now start censoring financial transactions for people that they don't like online, right? So not only am I being censored, my wealth is being stolen through inflation, but it's even censored on who I send it to. So that's a problem. We also have another problem that we used to have like a rule of law where like the Constitution was rule of law, and we all knew what that was, and we could plan our lives based off of that. But today we're ruled by men who are changing the rules on us constantly. I don't know what I was thinking about going back to California, but I don't know what the laws are going to be there next month. Will I be allowed to travel around the country freely? And so like we have that. So those are problems. So technology comes to solve those problems. And so technology moves in a 50-year revolution cycle. So right as the 250-year revolution cycle is hitting, we have a technology cycle that's also hitting at the same time. And it's given us decentralization, exactly what we need. which is
Right.
pretty interesting when you look at it that way.
Yeah.
And so if the problem is the money printer, we need to decentralize that and take that away.
Mm-hmm.
If the problem is censorship, we need something that's censorship resistant.
Mm-hmm.
If the problem is that we have men changing rules all the time, we need something that has immutable law and code. So really, we need to take man out of the equation because that's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's pretty interesting that we have a technology like Bitcoin that gives us exactly what we need at the same time. And then the financial system is looking to be reset on an 80-year cycle. 80 years ago was the Bretton Woods agreement, where the whole world got onto a one world money system. And today, last year, the IMF called for a time for a Bretton Woods 2.
Mm-hmm.
So like all three of those converging. So I think that kind of tells us where the future is going, at least
Yeah.
I'm hoping. And I believe the answer is the future is decentralized.
Yeah. Well, one of the, I guess the pushbacks that is typically brought against an argument like that is kind of the power dynamics. And what I would say is, yeah, if we're not at peak globalization, peak centralization right now, it seems like we're pretty close. Right. So it might get worse before it gets better, but it's a snake eating its own tail. Right. At some point, the dynamics and the centralization, it collapses in on itself, and kind of like a phoenix, decentralization rises from the ashes of that.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And so just like there's 4 seasons in the year, summer, spring, winter, fall. And yeah, on the calendar, there's a day when we change to spring, but it doesn't mean that the weather changes on that day, right? So it's kind of plus or minus. Yeah. And so all these cycles are kind of plus or minus a couple of years. Really, it's this decade is where it's all happening. Mm-hmm. Lenin famously said that there's decades where nothing seems to happen, and there's days where decades seem to happen. And so that's where we're at. It's kind of this like generational theory that's popularized in the fourth turning. But really all that change is happening this decade. And to your point, I would agree that things are going to get worse before they get better. I think these next couple of years are going to be pretty rough. And then I think things get better on the backside of that.
Yeah. One of the things that you mentioned was that gold can't be transferred over the internet. And so a lot of people have said, okay, well, Bitcoin is worthless because it's not backed by anything. And so what we need is kind of a combination of Bitcoin and gold, like a cryptocurrency that's backed by gold. But the problem is you still can't transfer that gold over the internet. So that crypto layer on top of the gold, either the gold is useless or the crypto is useless. Right, because it's just the ownership that's being tripped, but the gold itself is staying there, so you're still relying on a third party to hold it for you.
Well, let's think about that for a second. So first of all, that would require gold to become centralized, right? That company, to your point, has to store it. So I would say that centralization always leads to manipulation. Mm-hmm. So right off the bat, that's a problem, like we already had. But the second problem is a bigger one. Bitcoin isn't backed by anything. Okay, what's gold backed by? What's gold backed by?
The typical answers would be, well, it's got industrial use, so you can use it in electronics. It's made for art. It's used for jewelry.
It's a monetary metal, so none of the value comes from that. All the value is monetary. So what gold is backed by is energy. Right. I had to go buy land. I had to go set up machinery. I had to dig up the earth. I had to process it, and it cost me $1,500 to get an ounce out of the ground. I can sell it for $1,800. Mm-hmm. Right. Well, what's Bitcoin backed by? Energy.
Right.
I have to go buy equipment, set it up in a factory, buy electricity, run energy to produce the Bitcoin. So Bitcoin's backed by energy, which is the exact thing that gold is backed by, in my opinion. I think a lot of people get caught up in this belief, and maybe Peter Schiff has been responsible for it, but everyone has this belief that gold has intrinsic value. People get caught up in a belief that there is even such a thing as intrinsic value. Right. I believe that there's no such thing as intrinsic value. All value is subjective. Yeah. Right. If you and I were trapped on a deserted island, no food, water, no boat, no phone, but we had $1 billion in a suitcase, that $1 billion is worthless. If there was a guy in a hut with a couple fish and a coconut, he'd be way richer than us. Yeah. Because he had goods and services. And so another example would be, last night I went out to dinner and I threw my leftovers away. But if I was on that deserted island, those leftovers would be worth every penny I had. Right. And so it's all subjective. And so anybody that thinks that there's such thing as intrinsic value, I think is kind of just missing that whole point. Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And it's funny that you bring up Peter Schiff, because that's really the true Austrian economics perspective on value is subjective and in the marginal utility
theory. But
so how does he miss it?
I honestly, I don't know. It might be one of those, in my opinion, might be one of those things where it's like, at a certain point it becomes a hill to die on, because it's been, you've been so adamant about it for so long. But from a technology standpoint, I wouldn't say intrinsic value, but the use value isn't necessarily the coin or the token or the Bitcoin itself. It's the payments network with the network effects. Like Visa would be completely worthless if there was one Visa card and one card reader that could accept Visa. The reason Visa has value is because every card reader on the planet takes Visa. And so the Bitcoin network is a payments network that just happens to have the currency, overlapped on that.
Yeah, Metcalfe's law, right? So it's like the network is the value of the nodes that it has. And so the more people that use it, the more powerful it is. And so that's absolutely right. So Bitcoin, for example, could be forked, and you can create Bitcoin Cash or Bitcoin BSV, right? You can create all these forks of it, but there's no network there.
Right.
So just because you have the technology doesn't mean that you brought the value with you. So that's definitely a good example. And then you could even argue with all the other cryptocurrencies that are out there as well, which is so money has a bunch of properties, right? Divisible, portable, durable, but also saleable. So money has to be widely recognized, right? So what's the most widely recognized cryptocurrency? Bitcoin, right? It has the network effect, to your point, right? But then also back to solutions come to problems. What are the problems? The money printer, the centralization, the changing rules, okay? So the world didn't need a faster money. No one was asking for a faster money. I didn't need that. Venmo's pretty dang fast. I didn't need that. What I wanted was a censorship resistant money, right? Immutable law. So when you have these other coins saying they're faster, they're cheaper, or you have, I don't know about the fans on your channel, but if you have Ethereum or Cardano, Cardano has what they call a decentralized governance. I don't want something with governance. I don't want something where people can change the rules on me. That's the whole point. We have a fiat money system where they change the rules. I don't want that. I want something that has immutable code. So I think that's what the world needs. And then, of course, you have to understand the technology side of it as well, because technology works kind of the same way. If we go back and look at, there's been 5 technological revolutions in the last couple hundred years. So the Industrial Revolution, steam engines and steel, electricity, oil and automobiles. In 1971 was the microprocessor, which led to personal computers and the internet information. That's what we're doing now. But if you look at each one of those and you look at the way they reach adoption, it works kind of the same way. So with automobiles, for example, same in the internet. The first automobile comes out, all the investors rush in, speculators come in. Next thing you know, there's 250 automobile manufacturers, but there was no market. There wasn't people to buy those cars. There wasn't any infrastructure. There was no roads. There's no gas stations. There's no service centers. So you needed those things. We saw the same with the internet. The internet had been around since the 80s. In 1990, the first WW went live. 1994, the first purchase happened with a pizza. 1995 was the first IPO, Netscape. Money came in. By 1999, you had every .com in the world with the pets.com and the webvan.com. The problem was the same. There was no market, no infrastructure. So there was no one to buy pet products online back then. And the infrastructure wasn't there. The internet was too slow. You couldn't even use it to buy stuff back then. And so we see the same thing with the Bitcoin space. Everyone's trying to make something, this blockchain for ticket sales or for supply chain management or for whatever, but there's no market. Nobody's using it. The technology's not there. But the way technology works is it scales in layers, just like our financial system. So gold's a base layer, paper, second layer, checks is a third layer, credit card's a fourth layer, Venmo's a fifth layer. Technology works that, right? So you have the TCP/IP base layer. And then if you want email, SMTP, add that. Oh, we need secure pages. Okay, HTTPS, we add that. And so right now, Bitcoin has a second layer called Lightning. There's Lightning, Liquid are the kind of the main ones. And on Lightning now, I can send Bitcoin faster, cheaper, and more private than any other cryptocurrency.
Right.
So then what do we need those for? I was just down in El Salvador, actually on my channel. I just put out a video, my documentary of going to El Salvador. Massive works going on down there. And they're using everything in Lightning. And you can just walk around town and pay for your coffee or your pupusas in Lightning. And it's instant, just like that. And now I was in Dallas at the Bitcoin conference last week, and they had a hackathon. And now there's like a third layer that they're starting to build on Bitcoin. And some of the developers that were there developed, there's a new phone that I can make calls over the Bitcoin network. Now there's a new platform. I'm meeting with the CEO tomorrow that I'll probably roll out for my own community, where I'll have my own community where we can all chat between us. All my episodes can be in there, and it's all built on Bitcoin. When we chat, when we send messages back and forth, it's going over the Bitcoin network. If you and I use WhatsApp or Telegram or Signal, it's going through their servers.
Right.
We could send chat messages over the Bitcoin network peer to peer.
Interesting.
I mean, so when people think, oh, I get Bitcoin, it's kind of like digital gold. No, it's like digital cash. Yeah, like the electricity was a way to replace a candle, sure.
Yeah,
but electricity got way bigger. And so
Yeah.
Bitcoin, yeah, it's kind of like a digital cash. It's kind of like a digital gold. It's not money. It's not a commodity. It's code. And that code is a censorship resistant network that's allowing us to build all types of applications, including voice, video, chat, etc. It's amazing.
So it sounds like the bandwidth can scale to the point where you might see social networks and stuff like that built on the Bitcoin network that are censorship resistant. And am I understanding that correctly?
Well, we don't know, but I'm old, so I was around in the early days of the internet. As I said, like in 1999, the internet was too slow to really buy stuff off.
Right.
Of. So as the bandwidth increased, it would always get taken up. It was like this race. Right. So the faster the bandwidth went up, like Netflix, think about Netflix. Netflix, I think, launched in 1997, but they didn't actually start streaming until was it 2005 or something like that?
Yeah.
I don't remember, but because the bandwidth wasn't later, there.
Yeah. Right.
What's that?
Maybe even later. Yeah. It was a while.
The iPhone didn't even come out till 2007.
Right.
So like 10 years later. But so anyway, my point is that even though Netflix was started as Netflix to watch flicks over the net, they couldn't do that for a long time because it took time to scale. And so Bitcoin, I think, is kind of following that same path. Will it ever get there? I don't know. Humans are really bad at figuring out the future. Like in 1997, the internet was like a way to chat, send electronic messages, but we didn't know that our car would be hooked to something called a cloud using something called social media to navigate us around traffic, because we didn't have those things. But it definitely has the potential to get there.
Yeah. You mentioned something that I've gotten a lot of pushback on talking about this before, so I want to hear your thoughts a little bit more on this. That when you trace back the major issues in society, you pull back the curtains, you dig deep enough, eventually you get to the money printer, you get to the endless expansion of the money supply, you get to this to the people who are able to control the money, and that sound money is a leash on evil being able to scale. And so I've gotten a lot of pushback on that, and it seems like many people disagree with that. So I want to hear you, kind of elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, first I'll just start with one thing that says, again, what is money? What is money, right? So money is communication. That's what money is. So money communicates value. The price is the signal. So in the US, there's 330 million people. We all are humans, so we have changing wants, needs, and desires. I love chocolate ice cream, but today I just want vanilla. I don't know why. So how is it that we could live in a world with almost 8 billion people and the exact product I want and need is on the shelf at the exact time? How does the world coordinate all that to get all that made and just the way I wanted and delivered? It's the price. The price is the signal that coordinates all that. And so what happens is when you dump in $8 trillion into the economy in 12 to 14 months, the signal gets distorted. So now, are houses expensive or are they cheap? Should I buy a house right now? Well, houses are at all-time highs. Well, all-time highs in what? Well, in dollars are at all-time highs, but not in gold or oil. They're not, right? Like, I don't know. And now we're starting to see shortages. We're seeing supply chain backups, all these things. That's what happens when the signal gets distorted. Okay. So then back to the next part of the question, which was people push back and say that sound money won't work. So what happens, I think, is maybe what you're asking, you can clarify, but people say that we have to have a money supply that expands. Is that what you're saying? We can't have a fixed money supply?
Either that's one of the objections. The other objection is that a sound money system doesn't have any influence on really evil at scale or the biggest societal problems.
Okay. So those are two separate things. So
Yeah.
the first, we'll tackle the evil at scale. Let's start there. So
All right.
I did a video on my channel a week or two ago talking about the Afghanistan thing.
Okay.
That was like a punch in the gut for me, man, to see how bad that was. I mean, 20 years there, $2.5 trillion. We left them $85 million worth of our best weapons. They're equipped better than 85% of the countries in the world now.
Yeah.
Like, what a nightmare, right? Well, none of that would have ever been possible without a money printer.
Yep.
Right off the bat.
Yeah.
So if you think that was atrocious, then you would say that having a fixed monetary supply would be pretty good, right? That's one example. But we can look at other ones. Let's look at lockdowns here in the United States. We'll stay away from the touchy subject because I know I'm a YouTube guy as well. But like, let's just look at lockdowns, right? So like lockdowns would never have happened if there wasn't a money printer, because how would they pay you to stay at home?
Right.
They couldn't do it. They would need the tax revenue. They would need you to continue working. That would have never happened. And we can continue to chase it on and on. We can look at the drug problem. I mean, look at all the wars that the government has declared: the war on terrorism, the war on drugs, the war on poverty. Like, they're all getting worse, but they're just dumping trillions of dollars at them. And so I think we can easily see that all these areas of evil, as you call them, are scalable because of that money printer.
Yeah. And that's just, I mean, when you look at the history of the world, different cultures throughout, different times, the evils that we can attribute to the United States government are probably not comparable to some of the stuff that we've seen in other places throughout, history. But all of these large scale atrocities were, if you're at a point where you have to stop the killing, let's say, when your money runs out, that's what I call a leash. It's not like a foolproof prevention. It's not like it's impossible, but it has to run out.
It's even more than that. So I love Warren Buffett's partner, Charlie Munger. I don't love him so much right now, but he has some really good quotes I like to say. So one of them is like, show me the incentives, I show you the outcome.
Yep.
And so, like, if you think about it, if I was a nation and I was maybe going to go to war, I would really think long and hard. Like, it's going to cost me a ton of money. And if I go and lose, I'm bankrupt, I lose my job, I lose my country, everything. So like, right off the bat, I'm going to be very careful before I even engage. And then to your point, then it has to end at some point. Wars would always end before World War I. Wars would end. World War I is when we really got that fiat money, and it started to accelerate that. But even further than that, back to the incentives and the outcome. So when you have a money printer, it distorts the incentives. Right. So what do I mean by that? So for example, they know, we have these 80-year debt cycles, debts at an all-time high. When we get, per the Keynesian multiplier, when a nation gets over 90% debt to GDP, it's kind of like the point of no return. Right now, the US is about 135. Like, it's kind of too late, right? If the market drops, we're going to be at 200%. There's only 4 ways out of that. So one is austerity. Let's go on a budget. Right. It's never going to work. They're never going to vote for that. 2 is they can tax you more, but people are only going to tolerate so much tax. 3rd, they can redistribute. Right? They can tax. So if we look at those 2, if we look at the taxing, they can only go so high. But what they can do is they can print more money. That's the debasement. That's the 4th option that all governments choose. But that's the same as taxing you, right? They're basically stealing your money. So they're incentivized. The incentives are the outcome. They're incentivized to just steal as much as they want because they can just keep printing. Now imagine in Africa, in the Congo, you have some warlord, and his incentive is, I can go steal the money from my people anytime I want, right? Kind of no different than our government does. They steal money from us as well. But think about this incentive structure. So the person in the Congo, if they know that the warlord's going to come steal all their stuff anytime, they're not incentivized to save. They're not incentivized to plan for the future, right? And the warlord's only not incentivized to do anything good. He's only going to go steal their wealth. What if they could put their wealth in a place that couldn't be stolen? That changes the incentive structure. So now that person knows they can't steal my wealth. Now I can save. Now I can think long-term. Now I can plan for the future. But what it also does is it changes the warlord. He knows he can't go steal wealth. So what is he going to do? He has to find a way to provide value.
Yeah.
just like our government would. If the government couldn't steal our wealth, they would be forced to actually provide a value to us in exchange for the tax revenue, as opposed to stealing the tax revenue from us.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And in addition to that, it goes back to what you were saying earlier about the pricing signal. And really, interest rates are the cost of money. And when, and money makes up 50% of every transaction.
Yeah.
And so when you're talking about distorting the information that society is using to make proper decisions about the future, well, money printing and artificially low interest rates are distorting everything. And so even ignoring the incentives, which nobody does, but even if you were to ignore the incentives, you're not receiving the proper information as a business owner, as an investor, as an entrepreneur, in order to make the right decisions about the future and how to provide value. And so a side effect of that, at the very least, is going to be a worse amount of wealth created or less value created in society. And at worst, it could be absolute wealth destruction.
Yeah. Well, what you have is you have a misallocation of capital.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So again, you can really trace this stuff down to philosophy. Jordan Peterson recently did this conversation with Breedlove and John Vallis talking about Bitcoin, and it was amazing to hear it from his viewpoint. But if you back this stuff down to philosophy, it really goes down to incentives, kind of Austrian economics. But back to my life, my energy, how do I store it? My property is my life's battery, kind of a thing. But back to kind of what you were saying. When it distorts all these numbers, then I can't make good decisions. And so, for example, the price of bicycles went way up. Well, shoot, I'm going to go make a bunch more bicycles. Mm-hmm. But the reason why the bicycles prices went up is because the supply chain got backed up. Well, why did the supply chain get backed up? Right. And so it made me misallocate money. So now I put money into bicycles, but that's not what the market wanted. The signal distorted it. Same back to the housing thing. Like, should I buy a house right now? Like, are they at all-time highs? Well, in dollars they are, but priced in gold or oil or rice or Bitcoin, houses have never been cheaper. Mm-hmm. So like, I don't have the information I need to make the decisions because that signal. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So this might be a little bit more down the road, but there's we saw a fiat system emerge from gold, which originally was a decentralized, way to store wealth, and it slowly became centralized, and we saw fiat emerge on top of that, and then just kind of that base layer of gold was removed. Yeah. What are the chances that something like that happens with Bitcoin, where maybe it's because everybody just wants the convenience of trusting a third party? Like, we see a lot of people get their Bitcoin stolen because they leave it on an exchange instead of having it, in their wallet or anything like that. What are the odds we see at some point in the future a fiat system with a fractional reserve banking and on top of Bitcoin as the base layer?
Yeah. So you actually asked me this question earlier, I guess, and I didn't really get to it, but I think to that point, I think, as I kind of already made the case, the future is not centralized, the future is decentralized. And so I think what we're going to see is, like, of course, the powers that be, the IMF, the BIS, the central banks, will still try to have their centralized form of money. But for me, my reserve is Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. For Michael Saylor at MicroStrategy, his reserve is Bitcoin. For lots of S&P 500, their reserve is Bitcoin. Now we have a country like El Salvador turning their reserve to Bitcoin. And so some people may still choose dollars. Some people may choose gold. Some people may choose Bitcoin. So I think we'll see that decentralization, but eventually good money drives out bad. And so eventually, if you choose to store your wealth in the wrong asset, that's going to cost you money. So we saw that happen. The whole world went to a gold standard, but China tried to stay on a silver standard. Mm. And they lost their position as a world leader because of it. They made the wrong choice. So eventually it's going to matter. So I think eventually good money drives out bad. But to your point, or to your last question about, can it become centralized and controlled? I suppose it could. So theoretically, as many people, they could corner the market, get as much as they can, and say, we're never selling it, for example. But I think the probability of that's very small. There's always going to be people that are going to have it and they're going to be buying and selling it. It will push the value up. But even if it becomes centralized, let's say that it's all parked on the exchanges, you can't get it off, it still doesn't control the network. right? The infrastructure, the technology, the network, the miners, the nodes, they can't be taken over.
Right.
Now, there is one potential risk, and the beauty about Bitcoin, and this is what separates it from the other 8,000 currencies out there, as well as gold. So if you and I were transacting in gold and you brought me over money to buy my car in gold, how do I know if that gold is real?
Right.
You could sell me, you could be giving me bad gold. We heard about China with their like gold painted lead bars or whatever, right? So like, I don't know. So I'd have to have like the spectrometer, some expensive equipment to like check and see if it's gold. I probably don't have that. So you might bring it, but how can I trust yours? Right? With Bitcoin, we say don't trust, but verify. So what makes Bitcoin different than any other one out there is that I can run my own node. So you have miners and then you have nodes. The miners process transactions. The node run a copy of the database. I can run a node on a device about this big at my house, and I actually have 2 of them running. And then I can process all my Bitcoin transactions through my own node. That's my gold spectrometer. Now I know any Bitcoin I'm sending and receiving is real Bitcoin. Someone's not sending me counterfeit. The problem that we could potentially have is if we don't have enough people using their nodes and they're all using Coinbase. Right. Now, Coinbase has this, they have way more weight over the network, and they could potentially outvote other people, potentially. So that is a potential risk that we want to keep watch of. Now, there's the thing with Bitcoin, and I said no other one. So with Ethereum or Cardano, you can't run a node. You'd literally have to have a computer scientist and a commercial server set up in a co-located space to do it. And that's because the Bitcoin block size. So in 2017, there was the block size wars, and they tried to make the block size bigger so it could be faster. So that's what Bitcoin Cash is. The reason why we didn't want that is because in order to make the block sizes bigger, I wouldn't be able to hold the database on a hard drive this big anymore. Right. So we scale on the second layer. We didn't need to scale the base layer, right? So anyway, that would be one potential risk. We need to make sure that the nodes stay decentralized and people are actually using them, which they are now. But that'd be one thing to keep an eye on. Yeah, I've heard the argument about, you know, basically wealth hoarders, people buying Bitcoin, and then a small number of people holding all the Bitcoin, and you know, that the argument really kind of stops there. But when you think about it, in terms of the value of money versus the value of the stock of wealth in a society, if there are a small number of people that are hoarding, let's say, 15 million of the total Bitcoins, and there's only 6 million left in circulation, that means everything is much cheaper. So those people who are holding those Bitcoins are actually doing society a huge service by basically forcing deflation on the prices of goods and services in society. So it doesn't seem to me like that's an objection that holds any weight. And I would also say, back to that Warlord example. So people would say, to your point, you know, it's going to be cornered by all these rich people. They're never going to sell it because it's going to go up in value. They're going to hoard it, right? And I would say, well, they're still going to need to buy food and clothes and go on vacations, and they're going to buy houses, and they're still going to do all the things they normally do. So why wouldn't they spend it? One. The other thing is, back to that Warlord example, how would I get that hoarder to give up their Bitcoin? Oh, by providing value. Right. Like, exactly. That's how it's supposed to work, right? Yep. Right. So, you know, the problem that we have, they think that Bitcoin's not fair because rich people could hoard it. No, it's fair because everybody has the same opportunity. What's not fair about fiat is somebody has a money printer. Right. And that money printer gives money to BlackRock at 0% interest, and they go buy all the single family homes across the country at 35% over asking price because they just got a bunch of free money. That's unfair. And then all these people are like, oh, we need laws against that. They shouldn't be allowed to do that. No. How about we just take away the money printer? Yeah. Right. Yeah. You know. Right. Yeah. You don't fix a problem by adding more on top of what caused it in the first place. Yeah. And you mentioned something that is really the subjective theory of value. So you talked about, like, how do you get that Bitcoin hoarder to sell some of their Bitcoins? By providing value. Well, the only way they're going to give up that Bitcoin, let's say, for, you know, a new widget that you've invented, is because they think that widget is worth more than the Bitcoin that they're giving up. Even in today's society, even with broken money, that's really how value works. That's that anytime any transaction that is voluntary
takes
in a
place
free market.
in a free market, right? It's not when I buy internet because I've got one choice and they're the worst. But
Yeah.
in a free market, when the transaction is voluntary, both sides are profiting because each party is getting something they value more than what they just gave up.
Yeah. Each person thinks they're getting the better deal.
Yes. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it.
They wouldn't do it. So it's always in a free market, it's always going to be a win-win situation, or they wouldn't do it, to your point. But in a centrally planned model, it's always a win-lose.
Yeah.
Someone's always going to be losing. And so that's a problem. And so I think, yeah, the incentive is the outcome. But also, I would also say that if you think about the fiat money system today, I mean, we're at there's like a 250-year empire cycle. It goes through like 8 stages, and you go to like affluence. So after you go through several cycles, you get to affluence where things are good. That leads to like education, academia. Then that leads to decadence.
Yeah.
And then decadence goes to dependence, and dependence goes to bondage. But in that decadence, like people paying $68 million for a digital JPEG,
right.
like people paying $18,000 for an invisible piece of art. Like,
right.
So to your point, though, I think with fiat money, people have lost even the value of it. And like, they're just throwing it around. But like, all of a sudden with Bitcoin, like I ain't spending my Bitcoin. I'm going to think very carefully. Do I really need that before I spend it? Versus fiat, it's just, we've lost the value there.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And really that dynamic, Gresham's law doesn't really reverse itself until that bad money is basically worthless. So like right now, Lebanon is, doing what Venezuela did a couple of years ago. I've got some friends there actually, and it's absolutely terrible right now how it's not just that things are getting expensive. It's that everything is breaking as a result of the money getting destroyed. Yeah. And the dollars are preferred there from what I hear right now, US dollars. But the only reason people are ever spending US dollars is because nobody will accept the lira anymore. But if people still accepted the lira, they're going to hold on to those dollars and get rid of the lira because that's the more worthless item. And so it's like today we're, I'm going to spend my dollars before I spend my gold, before I spend my silver, before I spend my Bitcoin. But at some point, I might want something and the person selling it to me might not accept dollars anymore.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. The other thing that's interesting about Lebanon is, they had, 50% inflation in the last year, I think. And so
I think it's up to 90.
Oh, is it 90? Oh yeah, maybe it was like 85%. I was just looking at a bunch of different countries the other day. They have this sense of urgency. They're like, dude, if I don't spend my money right now, like it's I'll buy half as much in a couple of days, a month or whatever. Right. But we're also feeling it in the United States, but I think most people haven't finally quite realized it. So for example, the Federal Reserve, the central banks increased the money supply by about 24%. And we saw prices go up about 24%. Homes actually went up exactly 24%. Autos went up 30%. Lumber went up 300%. So we're seeing that. But what I think people are missing, and this is a big key, I think, for most people, is that I better go buy a house right now because it's going to be too expensive in the future. I better buy that car right now because it's going to be too expensive in the future. What they're not putting together is the opposite. It's not, I better buy the home because it's going to be more expensive later. It's, I better spend my dollars because they're actually going to buy less later.
Right.
And so I think people need to just kind of flip that. It's just a paradigm shift and realize that our money is losing about 25% of its purchasing power a year. Mm-hmm. And that's why people are so incentivized to spend it. And I don't see that getting better anytime soon.
Right. Yeah, 100%. Because as soon as the effects of the last expansion of money, the last big burst, as soon as the effects of that kind of run out, you start to see all the negative effects of the destruction of wealth, the misallocation of resources, and civil unrest and things like that. And the politicians have to step in with yet another short-term solution that is just delaying the inevitable increase in pain for later on.
Yeah. And it's like anything in life, right? Like what goes up must come down, right? So if you take caffeine, you're going to go up and then you're going to come down. If you take drugs, you're going to go higher up and you're going to come further down. And eventually you need to continue to have that just to stay up. And so once we've started that stimulus, then we have to continue that stimulus or things fall apart. Man, I could sit here and talk to you for another hour, but I'm going to have you on my show and we'll have another hour to talk because we can keep going for a long time.
Let's do it. I'm ready. All right. Hey, thank you so much.